The Dawn of a To-morrow by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Recorded by Linda Andrus. Chapter 1. There are always 2 ways of looking at a thing. Frequently, there are 6 or 7. But 2 ways of looking at a London fog are quite enough. When it is thick and yellow in the streets and stings a man's throat and lungs as he breathes it, an awakening in the early morning is either an unearthly and gruesome or a mysteriously enclosing, secluding, and comfortable thing. If one awakens in a healthy body and with a clear brain rested by normal sleep and retaining memories of a normally agreeable yesterday, one may lie watching the housemaid building the fire, and after she has swept the hearth and put things in order, lie watching the flames of the blazing and crackling wood catch the coals and set them blazing also, and dancing merrily and filling corners with a glow. And in so lying and realizing that leaping light and warmth and a soft bed are good things, one may turn over on one's back, stretching arms and legs luxuriously, drawing deep breaths and smiling at a knowledge of the fog outside, which makes 8:30 on a December morning as dark as 12 on a December night. Under such conditions, the soft, thick, yellow gloom has its picturesque and even humorous aspect. One feels enclosed by it at once fantastically and cozily, and is inclined to revel in imaginings of the picture outside, its Rembrandt lights and orange yellows, the halos about the street lamps, the illumination of shop windows, the flare of torches stuck up over coster barrows and coffee stands, the shadows on the faces of the men and women selling and buying beside them. Refreshed by sleep and comfort and surrounded by light, warmth, and good cheer, it is easy to face the day, to confront going out into the fog and feeling it a sort of pleasure in its mysteries. This is one way of looking at it, but only one. The other way is marked by enormous differences. A man, he had given his name to the people of the house as Anthony Dart, awakened in a 3rd-story bedroom in a lodging-house in a poor street in London, and as his consciousness returned to him, its slow and reluctant movings confronted the second point of view, marked by enormous differences. He had not slept 2 consecutive hours through the night, and when he had slept, he had been tormented by dreary dreams, which were more full of misery because of their elusive vagueness, which kept his tortured brain on a wearying strain of effort to reach some definite understanding of them. Yet when he awakened, the consciousness of being again alive was an awful thing. If the dreams could have faded into blankness, and all have passed with the passing of the night, how he could have thanked whatever gods there be, only not to awake. But he had awakened. The clock struck 9 as he did so, consequently he knew the hour. The lodging-house slavey had aroused him by coming to light the fire. She had set her candle on the hearth, and done her work as stealthily as possible, but he had been disturbed, though he had made a desperate effort to struggle back into sleep. That was no use. He was awake, and he was in the midst of it all again. Without the sense of a luxurious comfort, he opened his eyes and turned upon his back, throwing out his arms flatly, so that he lay as in the form of a cross, in heavy weariness and anguish. For months he had awakened each morning after such a night, and had so lain like a crucified thing. As he watched the painful flickering of the damp and smoking wood and coal, he remembered this and thought that there had been a lifetime of such awakenings, not knowing that the morbidness of a fagged brain blotted out the memory of more normal days, and told him fantastic lies which were but 100th part truth. He could see only the 100th part truth, and it assumed proportions so huge that he could see nothing else. In such a state, the human brain is an infernal machine, and its workings can only be conquered if the mortal thing which lives with it day and night and day, has learned to separate its controllable from its seemingly uncontrollable atoms, and can silence its clamor on its way to madness. Antony Dart had not learned this thing, and the clamor had had its hideous way with him. Physicians would have given a name to his mental and physical condition. He had heard these names often applied to men, the strain of whose lives had been like the strain of his own, and had left them as it had left him, jaded, joyless, breaking things. Some of them had been broken and had died, or were dragging out bruised and tormented days in their own homes or in madhouses. He always shuddered when he heard their names, and rebelled with sick fear against the mere mention of them. They had worked as he had worked. They had been stricken with the delirium of accumulation as he had been. They had been caught in the rush and swirl of the great maelstrom, and had been borne round and round in it, until, having grasped every coveted thing tossing upon its circling waters, they themselves had been flung upon the shore with both hands full, the rocks about them strewn with rich possessions, while they lay prostrate and gazed at all life had brought with dull, hopeless, anguished eyes. He knew, if the worst came to the worst, what would be said of him, because he had heard it said of others. He worked too hard. He worked too hard. He was sick of hearing it. What was wrong with the world? What was wrong with man? As man, if work could break him like this. If one believed in deity, the living creature it breathed into being must be a perfect thing, not one to be wearied, sickened, tortured by the life its breathing had created. A mere man would disdain to build a thing so poor and incomplete. A mere human engineer who constructed an engine whose workings were perpetually at fault, which went wrong when called upon to do the labor it was made for, who would not scoff at it and cast it aside as a piece of worthless bungling. "Something is wrong," he muttered, lying flat upon his cross and staring at the yellow haze which had crept through the crannies in the window sashes into the room. "Someone is wrong. Is it I or you?" His thin lips drew themselves back against his teeth in a mirthless smile, which was like a grin. "Yes," he said, "I am pretty far gone. I am beginning to talk to myself about God. Brian did it just before he was taken to Dr. Hewlett's place and cut his throat." He had not led a specially evil life. He had not broken laws, but the subject of deity was not one which his scheme of existence had included. When it had haunted him of late, he had felt it an untoward and morbid sign. The thing had drawn him. He had complained against it. He had argued, sometimes he knew, shuddering, that he had raved. Something had seemed to stand aside and watch his being and his thinking. Something which filled the universe had seemed to wait, and to have waited through all the eternal ages, to see what he, one man, would do. At times a great, appalled wonder had swept over him at his realization that he had never known or thought of it before. It had been there always, through all the ages that had passed, and sometimes, once or twice, the thought had in some unspeakable, untranslatable way brought him a moment's calm. But at other times he had said to himself with a shivering, soul cowering within him that this was only a part of it all, and was a beginning, perhaps, of religious monomania. During the last week he had known what he was going to do. He had made up his mind. This abject horror through which others had let themselves be dragged to madness or death he would not endure. The end should come quickly, and no one should be smitten aghast by seeing or knowing how it came. In the crowded, shabbier streets of London, there were lodging-houses where one, by taking precautions, could end his life in such a manner as would blot him out of any world where such a man as himself had been known. A pistol, properly managed, would obliterate resemblance to any human thing. Months ago, through chance talk, he had heard how it could be done, and done quickly. He could leave a misleading letter. He had planned what it should be, the story it should tell of a disheartened, mediocre venturer, of his poor, all returning, bankrupt and humiliated from Australia, ending his existence in such pennilessness that the parish must give him a pauper's grave. What did it matter where a man lay, so that he slept? Surely, with one's brains scattered, one would sleep soundly anywhere. He had come to the house the night before, dressed shabbily, with the pitiable respectability of a defeated man. He had entered droopingly, with bent shoulders and hopeless hang of head. In his own sphere, he was a man who held himself well. He had let fall a few dispirited sentences when he had engaged his back room from the woman of the house, and she had recognized him as one of the luckless. In fact, she had hesitated a moment before his unreliable look until he had taken out money from his pocket and paid his rent for a week in advance. She would have that at least for her trouble, he had said to himself. He should not occupy the room after tomorrow. In his own home some days would pass before his household began to make inquiries. He had told his servants that he was going over to Paris for a change. He would be safe and deep in his pauper's grave a week before they asked each other why they did not hear from him. All was in order. One of the mocking agonies was that living was done for. He had ceased to live. Work, pleasure, sun, moon, and stars had lost their meaning. He stood and looked at the most radiant loveliness of land and sky and sea, and felt nothing. Success brought greater wealth each day without stirring a pulse of pleasure, even in triumph. There was nothing left but the awful days and awful nights to which he knew physicians could give their scientific name, but had no healing for. He had gone far enough. He would go no farther. Tomorrow it would have been over long hours, and there would have been no public declaiming over the humiliating pitifulness of his end. And what did it matter? How thick the fog was outside! Thick enough for a man to lose himself in it. The yellow mist which had crept in under the doors and through the crevices of the window sashes gave a ghostly look to the room. A ghastly, abnormal look, he said to himself. The fire was smouldering instead of blazing. But what did it matter? He was going out. He had not bought the pistol last night like a fool. Somehow his brain had been so tired and crowded that he had forgotten. Forgotten. He mentally repeated the word as he got out of bed. By this time tomorrow. He should have forgotten everything. This time tomorrow. His mind repeated that also as he began to dress himself. Where should he be? Should he be anywhere? Suppose he awakened again. To something as bad as this? How did a man get out of his body? After the crash and shock, what happened? Did one find oneself standing beside the thing and looking down at it? It would not be a good thing to stand and look down on, even for that which had deserted it. But having torn oneself loose from it and its devilish aches and pains, one would not care. One would see how little it all mattered. Anything else must be better than this, the thing for which there was a scientific name but no healing. He had taken all the drugs, he had obeyed all the medical orders, and here he was after that last hell of a night, dressing himself in a back bedroom of a cheap lodging house to go out and buy a pistol in this damned fog. He laughed at the last phrase of his thought, the laugh which was a mirthless grin. "I am thinking of it as if I was afraid of taking cold," he said. "And tomorrow—" There would be no tomorrow. Tomorrows were at an end. No more nights, no more days, no more morrows. He finished dressing, putting on his discriminately chosen, shabby genteel clothes, with a care for the effect he intended them to produce. The collar and cuffs of his shirt were frayed and yellow, and he fastened his collar with a pin and tied his worn necktie carelessly. His overcoat was beginning to wear a greenish shade and look threadbare, so was his hat. When his toilet was complete, he looked at himself in the cracked and hazy glass, bending forward to scrutinize his unshaven face under the shadow of the dingy hat. "It is all right," he muttered. "It is not far to the pawn shop where I saw it." The stillness of the room as he turned to go out was uncanny. As it was a back room, there was no street below from which could arise sounds of passing vehicles, and the thickness of the fog muffled such sound as might have floated from the front. He stopped halfway to the door, not knowing why, and listened. To what? For what? The silence seemed to spread through all the house, out into the streets, through all London, through all the world, and he to stand in the midst of it, a man on the way to death, with no tomorrow. What did it mean? It seemed to mean something. The world withdrawn, life withdrawn, sound withdrawn, breath withdrawn. He stood and waited. Perhaps this was one of the symptoms of the morbid thing for which there was that name. If so, he had better get away quickly and have it over, lest he be found wandering about not knowing. But now he knew. Silence. He waited, and tried to hear, as if something was calling him, calling without sound. It returned to him, the sound of that which had waited through all the ages to see what he, one man, would do. He had never exactly pitied himself before. He did not know that he pitied himself now. But he was a man going to his death, and a light, cold sweat broke out on him, and it seemed as if it was not he who did it, but some other. He flung out his arms and cried aloud words he had not known he was going to speak. "Lord, Lord, what shall I do to be saved?" But the silence gave no answer. It was the silence still. And after standing a few moments, panting, his arms fell and his head dropped, and turning the handle of the door, he went out to buy the pistol. Chapter 2. As he went down the narrow staircase, covered with its dingy and threadbare carpet, he found the house so full of dirty yellow haze that he realized that the fog must be of the extraordinary ones which are remembered in after years as abnormal specimens of their kind. He recalled that there had been one of the sort 3 years before, and that traffic and business had been almost entirely stopped by it, that accidents had happened in the streets, and that people, having lost their way, had wandered about, turning corners until they found themselves far from their intended destinations, and obliged to take refuge in hotels or the houses of hospitable strangers. Curious incidents had occurred, and odd stories were told by those who had felt themselves obliged by circumstances to go out into the baffling gloom. He guessed that something of a like nature had fallen upon the town again. The gaslight on the landings and in the melancholy hall burned feebly, so feebly that one got but a vague view of the rickety hat stand and the shabby overcoats and headgear hanging upon it. It was well for him that he had but a corner or so to turn, before he reached the pawn shop in whose window he had seen the pistol he intended to buy. When he opened the street door, he saw that the fog was, upon the whole, perhaps even heavier and more obscuring, if possible, than the one so well remembered. He could not see anything 3 feet before him. He could not see with distinctness anything 2 feet ahead of him. The sensation of stepping forward was uncertain and mysterious enough to be almost appalling. A man not sufficiently cautious might have fallen into an open hole in his path. Antony Dart kept as closely as possible to the sides of the houses. It would have been easy to walk off the pavement into the middle of the street, but for the edges of the curb and the step downward from its level. Traffic had almost absolutely ceased, though in the more important streets link boys were making efforts to guide men or four-wheelers slowly along. The blind feeling of the thing was rather awful. Though but few pedestrians were out, Dart found himself once or twice brushing against or coming into forcible contact with men feeling their way about like himself. 1 turn to the right, he repeated mentally, 2 to the left, and the place is at the corner of the other side of the street. He managed to reach it at last, but it had been a slow and therefore long journey. All the gas jets the little shop owned were lighted, but even under their flare the articles in the window, the 1 or 2 cheaply gaudy dresses and shawls and men's garments, hung in the haze like the dreary dangling ghosts of things recently executed. Among watches and forlorn pieces of old-fashioned jewelry and odds and ends, the pistol lay against the folds of a dirty gauze shawl. There it was. It would have been annoying if someone else had been beforehand and had bought it. Inside the shop, more dangling spectres hung, and the place was almost dark. It was a shabby pawn shop, and the man lounging behind the counter was the shabby man with an unshaven, unamiable face. "I want to look at that pistol in the right-hand corner of your window," Antony Dart said. The pawnbroker uttered a sound, something between a half-laugh and a grunt. He took the weapon from the window. Antony Dart examined it critically. He must make quite sure of it. He made no further remark. He felt he had done with speech. Being told the price asked for the purchase, he drew out his purse and took the money from it. After making the payment, he noted that he still possessed a £5 note and some sovereigns. There passed through his mind a wonder as to who would spend it. The most decent thing, perhaps, would be to give it away. If it was in his room, tomorrow, the parish would not bury him, and it would be safer that the parish should. He was thinking of this as he left the shop and began to cross the street. Because his mind was wandering, he was less watchful. Suddenly, a rubber-tired hansom, moving without sound, appeared immediately in his path. The horse's head loomed up above his own. He made the inevitable, involuntary whirl aside to move out of the way. The hansom passed, and turning again, he went on. His movement had been too swift to allow his realizing the direction in which his turn had been made. He was wholly unaware that when he crossed the street, he crossed backward instead of forward. He turned a corner, literally feeling his way, went on, turned another, and after walking the length of the street, suddenly understood that he was in a strange place and had lost his bearings. This was exactly what had happened to people on the day of the memorable fog of 3 years before. He had heard them talking of such experiences and of the curious and baffling sensations they gave rise to in the brain. Now he understood them. He could not be far from his lodgings, but he felt like a man who was blind and who had been turned out of the path he knew. He had not the resource of the people whose stories he had heard. He would not stop and address anyone. There could be no certainty as to whom he might find himself speaking to. He would speak to no one. He would wander about until he came upon some clue. Even if he came upon none, the fog would surely lift a little and become a trifle less dense in course of time. He drew up the collar of his overcoat, pulled his hat down over his eyes, and went on, his hand on the thing he had thrust into a pocket. He did not find his clue as he had hoped, and instead of lifting, the fog grew heavier. He found himself at last no longer striving for any end, but rambling along mechanically, feeling like a man in a dream, a nightmare. Once he recognized a weird suggestion in the mystery about him. Tomorrow night, might one be wandering about aimlessly in some such haze? He hoped not. His lodgings were not far from the embankment, and he knew at last that he was wandering along it, and had reached one of the bridges. His mood led him to turn in upon it, and when he reached an embrasure, to stop near it and lean upon the parapet, looking down. He could not see the water, the fog was too dense, but he could hear some faint splashing against stones. He had taken no food and was rather faint. What a strange thing it was to feel faint for want of food, to stand alone, cut off from every other human being, everything done for. No wonder that sometimes, particularly on such days as these, there were plunges made from the parapet. No wonder. He leaned farther over and strained his eyes to see some gleam of water through the yellowness, but it was not to be done. He was thinking the inevitable thing, of course, but such a plunge would not do for him. The other thing would destroy all traces. As he drew back, he heard something fall with a solid tinkling sound of coin on the flag pavement. When he had been in the pawnbroker's shop, he had taken the gold from his purse and thrust it carelessly into his waistcoat pocket, thinking that it would be easy to reach when he chose to give it to one beggar or another, if he should see some wretch who would be the better for it. Some movement he had made in bending had caused a sovereign to slip out, and it had fallen upon the stones. He did not intend to pick it up, but in the moment in which he stood looking down at it, he heard close to him a shuffling movement. What he had thought a bundle of rags or rubbish, covered with sacking, some tramp's deserted or forgotten belongings, was stirring. It was alive, and as he bent to look at it, the sacking divided itself, and a small head, covered with a shock of brilliant red hair, thrust itself out, a shrewd small face turning to look up at him slyly, with deep-set black eyes. It was a human girl creature about 12 years old. "Are you going to do it?" she said in a hoarse, street-strained voice. "Yer would be a fool if you did, with as much as that on yer." She pointed with a reddened, chapped, and dirty hand at the sovereign. "Pick it up," he said. "You may have it." Her wild shuffle forward was an actual leap. The hand made a snatching clutch at the coin. She was evidently afraid that he was either not in earnest or would repent. The next second she was on her feet and ready for flight. "Stop," he said. "I've got more to give away." She hesitated, not believing him, yet feeling it madness to lose a chance. "More!" she gasped. Then she drew nearer to him, and a singular change came upon her face. It was a change which made her look oddly human. "God, mister," she said, "you can give away a quid like it was nothing, and you've got more, and you're going to do that just 'cause you had a bit too much last night and there's a fog this morning? You take it straight from me, don't you do it. I give yer that a tip for the serving." She was, for her years, so ugly and so ancient and hardened in voice and skin and manner that she fascinated him. Not that a man who has no tomorrow in view is likely to be particularly conscious of mental processes. He was done for, but he stood and stared at her. What part of the power moving the scheme of the universe stood near and thrust him on in the path designed, he did not know, then perhaps never did. He was still holding on to the thing in his pocket, but he spoke to her again. "What do you mean?" he asked glumly. She sidled nearer, her sharp eyes on his face. "I've been watching yer," she said. "I sat down and pulled the sack over me head to breathe inside it and get a bit warm, and I see yer come. I knowed what yer was after, I did. I watched yer through a hole in the sack. I wasn't going to call copper. I shouldn't want to be stopped myself if I had made up my mind. I seed a gal dragged out last week, and it'd have broke your heart to see her tear her clothes and scream. What business had they'd preventin' her to goin' off quiet? I wouldn't have stopped her, but when the quid fell, that made it different. He said, feeling the foolishness of the statement, but making it nevertheless. I am ill. Course you're ill. It's your head. Come along here me and get a cup of coffee at a stand and a buck up. If you give me that quid straight, which you may die, I'll go with yer and get a cup myself. I ain't 'ad a bite since yesterday, and it wa'n't nothin' but a slice of polony sausage I found on a dust heap. Come on, mister. She pulled his coat with her cracked hand. He glanced down at it mechanically and saw that some of the fissures had bled and the roughened surface was smeared with the blood. They stood together in the small space in which the fog enclosed them, he and she, the man with no tomorrow, and the girl thing who seemed as old as himself, with her sharp, small nose and chin, her sharp eyes and voice, and yet, perhaps, the fog's enclosing did it. Something drew them together in an uncanny way. Something made him forget the lost clue to the lodging-house. Something made him turn and go with her, a thing led in the dark. "How can you find your way?" he said. "I lost mine." "There ain't no fog can lose me," she answered, shuffling along by his side. "'Sides, it's going to lift. Look at that man coming towards us." It was true that they could see through the orange-colored mist the approaching figure of a man who was at a yard's distance from them. Yes, it was lifting slightly, at least enough to allow of one's making a guess at the direction in which one moved. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Apple Blossom Court," she answered. "Coffee stands in a street near it, and there's a shop where I can buy things." "Apple Blossom Court!" he ejaculated. "What a name!" "There ain't no apple blossoms there," chuckling, "nor no smell of 'em. 'Tain't as nice as its name is. Apple Blossom Court ain't." "What do you want to buy? A pair of shoes?" The shoes her naked feet were thrust into were leprous-looking things through which nearly all her toes protruded, but she chuckled when he spoke. "No, I'm a-goin' to buy a diamond tiara to go with the opry in," she said, dragging her old sack closer round her neck. "And I ain't 'ad a new one since I went to the last drawin'-room." It was impudent street chaff, but there was a cheerful spirit in it, and cheerful spirit had some occult effect upon morbidity. Antony Dart did not smile, but he felt a faint stirring of curiosity, which was, after all, not a bad thing for a man who had not felt an interest for a year. "What is it you are going to buy?" "I'm goin' to fill me stomach first," with a grin of elation. 3 thick slices of bread and drippin' and a mug of coffee. And then I'm going to get something hearty to carry to Polly. She ain't no good, poor thing." "Who is she?" Stopping a moment to drag up the heel of her dreadful shoe, she answered him with an unprejudiced directness which might have been appalling if he had been in the mood to be appalled. "Ain't 18, and trying to earn her living on the street. She ain't made for it. Little country thing, allus frightened to death and ready to bust out crying. Gents ain't goin' to stand that. A lot of 'em wants cheerin' up as much as she does. Gent as was in liquor last night knocked her down and give her a black eye. 'Twa'n't ill feelin', but he lost his temper and give her a knock casual. She can't go out tonight, and she's been huddled up all day cryin' for her mother." "Where is her mother?" "In the country on a farm. Polly took a place in a lodgin' house and got in trouble. The bibby was dead, and when she come out of Queen Charlotte's, she was took in by a woman and kept. She kicked her out in a week 'cause of her cryin'. Life didn't suit her. I found her cryin' fit to split her chist one night, corner of Apple Blossom Court, and I took care of her." "Where?" "The chambers," grinning. "Top loft of a house in the court. If anyone else'd have it, I should be turned out. It's an ole, and I can tell you, but it's better than sleepin' under the bridges." "Take me to see it," said Antony Dart. "I want to see the girl." The words spoke themselves. Why should he care to see either cockloft or girl? He did not. He wanted to go back to his lodgings with that which he had come out to buy. Yet he said this thing. His companion looked up at him with an expression actually relieved. "Would you take up with her?" with eager sharpness, as if confronting a simple business proposition. "She's pretty and clean, and she won't drink a drop of nothing. If she was treated kind, she'd be cheerfuler. She's got a round face and a light air and eyes. Her hair's curly. Perhaps you'd like her. Take me to see her. She'd look better tomorrow," cautiously, "when swelling's gone down round her eye." Dart started, and it was because he had for the last 5 minutes forgotten something. "I shall not be here tomorrow," he said. His grasp upon the thing in his pocket had loosened, and he tightened it. "I have some more money in my purse," he said deliberately. "I meant to give it away before going. I want to give it to people who need it very much." She gave him one of the sly, squinting glances. "Deservin' cases?" she put it to him in brazen mockery. "I don't care," he answered slowly and heavily. "I don't care a damn." Her face changed exactly as he had seen it change on the bridge when she had drawn near to him. Its ugly hardness suddenly looked human, and that she could look human was fantastic. "How much have you?" she asked. "How much is it?" "About £10. She stopped and stared at him with open mouth. "God!" she broke out. £10 send Apple Blossom Court to heaven. Leastways, it'd take some of it out of hell." "Take me to it," he said roughly. "Take me." She began to walk quickly, breathing fast. The fog was lighter, and it was no longer a blinding thing. A question occurred to Dart. "Why don't you ask me to give the money to you?" he said bluntly. "Dunno," she answered as bluntly, but after taking a few steps further she spoke again. "I'm cheerfuler than most of 'em," she elaborated. "If you're born cheerfuler, you can stand things. When I gets a job nussin' women's babies, they don't cry when I handles 'em. I gets many a bite and a copper 'cause of that. Folks like yer. I shall get on better than Polly when I'm old enough to go on the street." The organ of whose lagging, sick pumpings Anthony Dart had scarcely been aware of for months gave a sudden leap in his breast. His blood actually hastened in its pace and ran through his veins instead of crawling, a distinct physical effect of an actual mental condition. It was produced upon him by the mere matter-of-fact ordinariness of her tone. He had never been a sentimental man, and had long ceased to be a feeling one. But at that moment something emotional and normal happened to him. "You expect to live in that way?" he said. "Ain't nothing else for me to do. Wisht I was better looking, but I've got a lot of hair," pawing her mop, "and it's red. One day," chuckling, "a gent says to me, he says, 'Oh, you'll do. You're an ugly little devil, but you're a devil.'" She was leading him through a narrow, filthy back street, and she stopped, grinning up in his face. "I say, mister," she wheedled, "let's stop at the coffee stand. It's up this way." When he acceded and followed her, she quickly turned a corner. They were in another lane thick with fog, which flared with the flame of torches stuck in costers' barrows, which stood here and there, barrows with fried fish upon them, barrows with second-hand looking vegetables, and others piled with more than second-hand looking garments. Trade was not thriving, but near one or two of them dirty, ill-used looking women, a man or so, and a few children stood. At a corner which led into a black hole of a court, a coffee stand was stationed, in charge of a burly ruffian in corduroys. "Come along," said the girl. "There it is. It ain't strong, but it's hot." The girl held out her hand cautiously, the piece of gold lying upon its palm. She sidled up to the stand, drawing Dart with her, as if glad of his protection. "Hello, Barney," she said. "Here's a gent wants the mug of your best. I've had a bit of luck, and I wants one myself." "Garn," growled Barney. "You and your luck. Gent may want a mug, but he'd show your money first." "'Struth, I've got it. You ain't got the change for what I have in me hand. Here, has he, mister?" "Show it," taunted the man, and then turning to Dart, "You wants a mug of coffee?" "Yes." The girl held out her hand cautiously, the piece of gold lying upon its palm. "Looky here," she said. There were 2 or 3 men slouching about the stand. Suddenly a hand darted from between two of them who stood nearest. The sovereign was snatched. A screamed oath from the girl rent the thick air, and a forlorn enough scarecrow of a young fellow sprang away. The blood leapt in Antony Dart's veins again, and he sprang after him in a wholly normal passion of indignation. 1,000 years ago, as it seemed to him, he had been a good runner. This man was not one, and want of food had weakened him. Dart went after him with the strides which astonished himself. Up the street, into an alley, and out of it, a dozen yards more, and into a court, and the man wheeled with a hoarse, baffled curse. The place had no outlet. "Hell," was all the creature said. Dart took him by his greasy collar. Even the brief rush had left him feeling like a living thing, which was a new sensation. "Give it up," he ordered. The thief looked at him with a half-laugh and obeyed, as if he felt the uselessness of a struggle. He was not more than 25 years old, and his eyes were cavernous with want. He had the face of a man who might have belonged to a better class. When he had uttered the exclamation invoking the infernal regions, he had not dropped the aspirate. "I'm as hungry as she is," he raved. "Hungry enough to rob a child beggar?" said Dart. "Hungry enough to rob a starving old woman or baby," with a defiant snort. "Wolf hungry? Tiger hungry? Hungry enough to cut throats." He whirled himself loose and leaned his body against the wall, turning his face toward it. Suddenly he made a choking sound and began to sob. "Hell," he choked. "I'll give it up. I'll give it up." What a figure as he swung against the blackened wall, his scarecrow clothes hanging on him, their once decent material making their pinning together of buttonless places, their looseness and rents showing dirty linen, more abject than any other squalor could have made them. Antony Dart's blood, still running warm and well, was doing its normal work among the brain cells which had stirred so evilly through the night. When he had seized the fellow by the collar, his hand had left his pocket. He thrust it into another pocket and drew out some silver. "Go and get yourself some food," he said, "as much as you can eat. Then go and wait for me at the place they call Apple Blossom Court. I don't know where it is, but I am going there. I want to hear how you came to this. Will you come?" The thief lurched away from the wall and toward him. He stared up into his eyes through the fog. The tears had smeared his cheekbones. "God," he said, "will I come? Look and see if I'll come." Dart looked. "Yes, you'll come," he answered, and he gave him the money. "I'm going back to the coffee stand." The thief stood staring after him as he went out of the court. Dart was speaking to himself. "I don't know why I did it," he said, "but the thing had to be done." In the street he turned into, he came upon the robbed girl, running, panting, and crying. She uttered a shout and flung herself upon him, clutching his coat. "God," she sobbed hysterically, "I thought I'd lost yer. I thought I'd lost all of it, I did. 'Struth, I'm glad I found yer." And she stopped, choking with her sobs and sniffs, rubbing her face in her sack. "Here is your sovereign," Dart said, handing it to her. She dropped the corner of the sack and looked up with a queer laugh. "Did you find a copper? Did you give him in charge?" "No," answered Dart. "He was worse off than you. He was starving. I took this from him, but I gave him some money and told him to meet us at Apple Blossom Court." She stopped short and drew back a pace to stare up at him. "Well," she gave forth, "y'are a queer one." And yet, in the amazement on her face, he perceived a remote dawning of an understanding of the meaning of the thing he had done. He had spoken like a man in a dream. He felt like a man in a dream, being led in the thick mist from place to place. He was led back to the coffee stand, where now Barney, the proprietor, was pouring out coffee for a hoarse-voiced Costa girl with a draggled feather in her hat, who greeted their arrival hilariously. "Hello, Glad," she cried out. "Got your sovereign back?" Glad, it seemed to be the creature's wild name, nodded, but held close to her companion's side, clutching his coat. "Let's go in there and change it," she said, nodding towards a small pork and ham shop nearby, "and then you can take care of it for me." "What did she call you?" Antony Dart asked her as they went. Glad. Don't know as I ever had a name of my own. But a little cove as went once to the pantomime told me about a young lady as was fairy queen, and her name was Gladys Beverly St. John. So I called myself that. No one ever said it all at once, and they never say nothing but glad. I'm glad enough this morning, chuckling again, having the luck to come up with you, mister. Never had luck like it afore. They went into the pork and ham shop and changed the sovereign. There was cooked food in the windows, roast pork and boiled ham and corned beef. She bought slices of pork and beef and of suet pudding with a few currants sprinkled through it. Will yer help me to carry it? She inquired. I'll have to get a few pen'orth of coal and wood and a screw of tea and sugar. My wig, what a feed me and Polly'll have. As they returned to the coffee stand, she broke more than once into a hop of glee. Barney had changed his mind concerning her. A solid sovereign which must be changed, and a companion whose shabby gentility was absolute grandeur when compared with his present surroundings, made a difference. She received her mug of coffee and thick slice of bread and dripping with a grin, and swallowed the hot sweet liquid down in ecstatic gulps. Ain't I in luck, she said, handing her mug back when it was empty. Give me another, Barney. Anthony Dart drank coffee also and ate bread and dripping. The coffee was hot and the bread and dripping, dashed with salt, quite eatable. He had needed food and felt the better for it. Come on, mister, said Glad when their meal was ended. I want to get back to Polly, and there's coal and bread and things to buy. She hurried him along, breaking her pace with hops at the intervals. She darted into dirty shops and brought out things screwed up in paper. She went last into a cellar, and returned carrying a small sack of coal over her shoulders. Bought sack and all, she said elatedly. A sack's a good thing to have. Let me carry it for you, said Anthony Dart. Spile your coat, with her sidelong upward glance. I don't care, he answered. I don't care a damn. The final expletive was totally unnecessary, but it meant a thing he did not say. Whatsoever was thrusting him this way and that, speaking through his speech, leading him to do things he had not dreamed of doing, should have its will with him. He had been fastened to the skirts of this beggar imp, and he would go on to the end and do what was to be done this day. It was part of the dream. The sack of coal was over his shoulder when they turned into Apple Blossom Court. It would have been a black hole on a sunny day, and now it was like Hades, lit grimly by a gas jet or two, small and flickering, with the orange haze about them. Filthy, flagging, murky doorways, broken steps and broken windows stuffed with rags, and the smell of the sewers let loose, had Apple Blossom Court. Glad, with the wealth of the pork and ham shop and other riches in her arms, entered a repellent doorway in a spirit of great good cheer, and Dart followed her. Past a room where a drunken woman lay sleeping with her head on the table, a child pulling at her dress and crying, up a stairway with the broken balusters and breaking steps, through a landing, upstairs again, and up still farther until they reached the top. Glad stopped before a door and shook the handle, crying out, "It's only me, Polly. You can open it," she added to Dart in an undertone. "She has to keep it locked. No knowing who'd want to get in. Polly," shaking the door handle again, "Polly, it's only me." The door opened slowly. On the other side of it stood a girl with a dimpled, round face, which was quite pale. Under one of her childishly vacant blue eyes was a discoloration, and her curly fair hair was tucked up on the top of her head in a knot. As she took in the fact of Anthony Dart's presence, her chin began to quiver. "I ain't fit to see no one," she stammered pitifully. "Why did you, Glad? Why did you?" "Ain't no harm in him," said Glad. "He's one of the friendly ones. He give me a sovereign. Look what I've got," hopping about as she showed her parcels. "You need not be afraid of me," Anthony Dart said. He paused a second, staring at her, and suddenly added, "Poor little wretch." Her look was so scared and uncertain a thing that he walked away from her and threw the sack of coal on the hearth. A small grate with broken bars hung loosely in the fireplace. a battered tin kettle tilted drunkenly near it, a mattress, from the holes in whose ticking straw bulged, lay on the floor in a corner, with some old sacks thrown over it. Glad had, without doubt, borrowed her shoulder covering from the collection. The garret was as cold as the grave, and almost as dark. The fog hung in it thickly. There were crevices enough through which it could penetrate. Anthony Dart knelt down on the hearth and drew matches from his pocket. "We ought to have brought some paper," he said. Glad ran forward. "What a gent ye are!" she cried. "Ye ain't never going to light it." "Yes." She ran back to the rickety table and collected the scraps of paper which had held her purchases. They were small but useful. "That what was round the sausage and puddin's greasy," she exulted. Polly hung over the table and trembled at the sight of meat and bread. Plainly, she did not understand what was happening. The greased paper set light to the wood, and the wood to the coal. All three flared and blazed with a sound of cheerful crackling. Blaze threw out its glow as finely as if it had been set alight to warm a better place. The wonder of a fire is like the wonder of a soul. This one changed the murk and gloom to brightness, and the deadly damp and cold to warmth. It drew the girl, Polly, from the table despite her fears. She turned involuntarily, made 2 steps toward it, and stood gazing while its light played on her face. Glad whirled and ran to the hearth. "You put on a lot," she cried. "But, oh my God, don't it warm you? Come on, Polly, come on." She dragged out a wooden stool, an empty soap-box, and bundled the sacks into a heap to be sat upon. She swept the things from the table and set them in their paper wrappings on the floor. "Let's all sit down close to it," she said, "and get warm and eat." She was the leaven which leavened the lump of their humanity. What this leaven is, who has found out? But she, little rat of a gutter, was formed of it, and her mere pure animal joy in the temporary animal comfort of the moment stirred and uplifted them from their depths. Chapter 3. They drew near and sat upon the substitutes for seats in a circle, and the fire threw up flame and made a glow in the fog hanging in the black hole of a room. It was Glad who set the battered kettle on, and when it boiled, made tea. The other two watched her, being under her spell. She handed out slices of bread and sausage and pudding on bits of paper. Polly fed with tremulous haste, Glad herself with rejoicing and exulting in flavors. Anthony Dart ate bread and meat as he had eaten the bread and dripping at the stall, accepting his normal hunger as part of the dream. Suddenly, Glad paused in the midst of a huge bite. "Mister," she said, "perhaps that cove's waiting for you. Let's have him in. I'll go and fetch him." She was getting up, but Dart was on his feet first. "I must go," he said. "He is expecting me, and—" "Ah," said Glad, "let me go along a year, mister, just to show there's no ill feelin'." "Very well," he answered. It was she who led, and he who followed. At the door she stopped and looked round with a grin. "Keep up the fire, Polly," she threw back. "Ain't it warm and cheerful? It'll do the cove good to see it." She led the way down the black, unsafe stairway. She always led. Outside the fog had thickened again, but she went through it as if she could see her way. At the entrance to the court, the thief was standing, leaning against the wall with fevered, unhopeful waiting in his eyes. He moved miserably when he saw the girl, and she called out to reassure him. "I ain't up to no harm," she said. "I only come with the gent." Anthony Dart spoke to him. "Did you get food?" The man shook his head. "I turned faint after you left me, and when I came to I was afraid I might miss you," he answered. "I daren't lose my chance. I bought some bread and stuffed it in my pocket. I've been eating it while I've stood here." "Come back with us," said Dart. "We are in a place where we have some food." He spoke mechanically and was aware that he did so. He was a pawn pushed about upon the board of this day's life. "Come on," said the girl. "You can get enough to last you for 3 days." She guided them back through the fog until they entered the murky doorway again. Then she almost ran up the staircase to the room they had left. When the door opened, the thief fell back a pace, as before an unexpected thing. It was the flare of firelight which struck upon his eyes. He passed his hand over them. "A fire," he said. "I haven't seen one for a week. Coming out of the blackness, it gives a man a start." Improvident joy gleamed in Glad's eyes. "We'll be warm once," she chuckled. "If we ain't never warm again." She drew her circle about the hearth again. The thief took his place next to her, and she handed out food to him, a big slice of meat, bread, a thick slice of pudding. "Fill yourself up," she said. "Then you'll feel like you can talk." The man tried to eat his food with decorum, some recollection of the habits of his better days restraining him, but starved nature was too much for him. His hands shook, his eyes filled, his teeth tore. The rest of the circle tried not to look at him. Glad and Polly occupied themselves with their own food. Anthony Dart gazed at the fire. Here he sat, warming himself in a loft with a beggar, a thief, and a helpless thing of the street. He had come out to buy a pistol. Its weight still hung in his overcoat pocket, and he had reached this place of whose existence he had an hour ago not dreamed. Each step which had led him had seemed a simple, inevitable thing, for which he had apparently been responsible, but which he knew, yes, somehow he knew, he had of his own volition neither planned nor meant. Yet here he sat, a part of the lives of the beggar, the thief, and the poor thing of the street. What did it mean? "Tell me," he said to the thief, "how you came here." By this time the young fellow had fed himself and looked less like a wolf. It was to be seen now that he had blue-gray eyes, which were dreamy and young. "I have always been inventing things," he said a little huskily. "I did it when I was a child. I always seemed to see there might be a way of doing a thing better, getting more power. When other boys were playing games, I was sitting in corners trying to build models out of wire and string, and old boxes and tin cans. I often thought I saw the way to things, but I was always too poor to get what was needed to work them out. Twice I heard of men making great names and fortunes because they had been able to finish what I could have finished if I had had a few pounds. It used to drive me mad and break my heart." His hands clenched themselves, and his huskiness grew thicker. "There was a man," catching his breath, "who leapt to the top of the ladder and set the whole world talking and writing. And I had done the thing first, I swear I had. It was all clear in my brain, and I was half mad with joy over it, but I could not afford to work it out. He could, so to the end of time it will be his." He struck his fist upon his knee. "Aw," the deep little drawl was a groan from Glad. "I got a place in an office at last. I worked hard, and they began to trust me. I had a new idea. It was a big one. I needed money to work it out. I remembered what had happened before. I felt like a poor fellow running a race for his life. I knew I could pay back 10 times, 100 times what I took." "You took money?" said Dart. The thief's head dropped. "No. I was caught when I was taking it. I wasn't sharp enough. Someone came in and saw me, and there was a crazy row. I was sent to prison. There was no more trying after that. It's nearly 2 years since, and I've been hanging about the streets and falling lower and lower. I've run miles, panting after cabs with luggage in them, and had not strength to carry in the boxes when they stopped. I've starved and slept out of doors, but the thing I wanted to work out is in my mind all the time, like some machine tearing round. It wants to be finished. It never will be, that's all." Glad was leaning forward, staring at him, her roughened hands with the smeared cracks on them clasped round her knees. "Things has to be finished," she said. "They finish theirselves." "How do you know?" Dart turned on her. "Dunno how I know, but I do. When things begin, they finish. It's like a wheel rollin' down a hill." Her sharp eyes fixed themselves on Dart's. "All of us'll finish somethin', 'cause we've begun. You will, Polly will, he will, I will." She stopped with a sudden sheepish chuckle and dropped her forehead on her knees, giggling. "Dunno what I'm talking about," she said. but it's true." Dart began to understand what it was, and he also saw that this ragged thing, who knew nothing whatever, looked out on the world with the eyes of a seer, though she was ignorant of the meaning of her own knowledge. It was a weird thing. He turned to the girl Polly. "Tell me how you came here," he said. He spoke in a low voice and gently. He did not want to frighten her, but he wanted to know how she had begun. When she lifted her childish eyes to his, her chin began to shake. For some reason she did not question his right to ask what he would. She answered him meekly, as her fingers fumbled with the stuff of her dress. "I lived in the country with my mother," she said. "We was very happy together. In the spring there was primroses and lambs. I can't abide to look at the sheep in the park these days. They remind me so. There was a girl in the village got a place in town and came back and told us all about it. It made me silly. I wanted to come here too. I came." She put her arm over her face and began to sob. "She can't tell you," said Glad. "There was a swell in the house, made love to her. She used to carry up coals to his parlor, and he talked to her. He had a way with them." Polly broke into a smothered wail. "Oh, I did love him so, I did," she cried. "I'd have let him walk over me. I'd have let him kill me." "He nearly did it," said Glad. "He went away sudden, and she's never heard a word of him since." From under Polly's face, hiding arm, came broken words. "I couldn't tell my mother. I didn't know how. I was too frightened and ashamed. Now it's too late. I shall never see my mother again, and it seems as if all the lambs and primroses in the world was dead. Ah, they're dead. They're dead, and I wish I was, too." Glad's eyes winked rapidly, and she gave a hoarse little cough to clear her throat. Her arms still clasping her knees, she hitched herself closer to the girl and gave her a nudge with her elbow. "Buck up, Polly," she said. "We ain't none of us finished yet. Look at us sittin' now, sittin' by our own fire with bread and puddin' inside us, and think what we was this mornin'. Who knows what we'll have this time tomorrow?" Then she stopped and looked with a wide grin at Antony Dart. "How did I come here?" she said. "Yes," he answered. "How did you come here?" "I don't know," she said. "I was here first thing I remember. I lived with an old woman in another house in the court. One morning when I woke up, she was dead. Sometimes I've begged and sold matches. Sometimes I've took care of women's children or helped with them when they had to lie up. I've seen a lot, but I like to see a lot. 'Ope I'll see a lot more afore I'm done. I'm used to being hungry and cold and all that, but I allers like to see what's comin' tomorrow. There's allers something else tomorrow. That's all about me." She chuckled again. Dart picked up some fresh sticks and threw them on the fire. There was some fine crackling, and a new flame leapt up. "If you could do what you liked," he said, "what would you like to do?" Her chuckle became an outright laugh. "If I had 10 pounds?" she asked, evidently prepared to adjust herself in imagination to any form of unlooked-for good luck. "If you had more?" His tone made the thief lift his head to look at him. "If I'd a wand like the one old Jem told me was in the pantomime?" "Yes," he answered. She sat and stared at the fire a few moments, and then began to speak in a low, luxuriating voice. "I'd get a better room," she said, reveling. "There's one in the next house. I'd have a few sticks of furniture in it, a bed and a chair or two. I'd get some warm petticoats and a shawl and a hat with an ostrich feather in it. Polly and me'd live together. We'd have fire and grub every day. I'd get Drunken Bet's bibby put in a home. I'd help the women when they had to lie up. I'd help 'em a bit," with a jerk of her elbow toward the thief. "If he was kept for perhaps he could work out that thing in his head. I'd go round the court and help with the husbands that knocks 'em about. I'd put a stop to the knocking about, a queer fixed look showing itself in her eyes. If I had money, I could do it. How much? With sudden prudence. Could a body have, with one of them wands? More than enough to do all you have spoken of, answered Dart. It's a shame a body couldn't have it. Apple blossom court'd be a different thing. It'd be the same as Miss Montbyon says it's going to be. She laughed again, this time as if remembering something fantastic, but not despicable. Who is Miss Montalban? She's the old woman as lives next floor below. When she was young, she was pretty and used to dance in the halls. Drunken Bet says she was one of the worst. She said when she got old, it made her mad, and she got wusser. She was ready to tear Gail's eyes out, and when she'd get took for making a row, she'd fight like a tiger cat. About a year ago, she tumbled downstairs when she'd had too much, and she broke both her legs. You remember, Polly? Polly hid her face in her hands. Oh, when they took her away to the hospital, she shuddered. Oh, when they lifted her up to carry her. I thought Polly'd have a fit when she heard her screaming and swearing. My, it was language. But it was the hospital did it. Did what? Dunno. With an uncertain, even slightly odd laugh. Dunno what it did. Neither does nobody else. But something happened. It was along of a liddy as come in one day and talked to her when she was lying there. My eye, chuckling. It was queer talk, but I liked it. Perhaps it was lies, but it was cheerful lies that helps you. What I says is, if things ain't cheerful, people's got to be, to fight it out. The women in the house larfed fit to kill theirselves when she first come home limping and talked to 'em about what the liddy told her. But arter a bit, they liked to hear her, just along of the cheerfulness. Said it was like a pantomime. Drunken Bet says, if she could get hold of it and believe it same as Jinny Montalban does, it'd be as cheerin' as drink and last longer. Is it a kind of religion? Is it a kind of religion? Dart asked, having a vague memory of rumors of fantastic new theories and half-born beliefs, which had seemed to him weird visions floating through fagged brains wearied by old doubts and arguments and failures. The world was tired. The whole earth was sad. Centuries had wrought only to the end of this 20th century's despair. Was the struggle waking even here, in this backwater of the huge city's human tide? He wondered with dull interest. Is it a kind of religion? He said. It's cheerfuler. Glad thrust out her sharp chin uncertainly again. There's no hellfire in it, and there ain't no blime laid on God Almighty. The word as she uttered it seemed to have no connection whatever with her usual colloquial invocation of the deity. When a dray run over little Billy and crushed him into a rag, and his mother was screaming and dragging her hair down, the curick, he says, it's God's will. He says, and he ain't no bad sort, neither. And his office was white and wet with sweat. God done it, he says. And me, I'd missed the child, and I clawed me hair, sim as if I was his mother, and I screamed out, then damn him. And the curick, he dropped sitting down on the curbstone, and it hid his face in his hands. Dart hid his own face after the manner of the wretched curate. No wonder, he groaned. His blood turned cold. But, said Glad, Miss Montalban's liddy, she says God A'mighty never done it, nor never intended it, and if we kept sayin' and believin' he's close to us, and not millions of miles away, we'd be took care of whilst we was alive, and not have to wait till we was dead. She got up on her feet and threw up her arms with a sudden jerk and involuntary gesture. I'm alive! I'm alive! I'm alive! She cried out. I've got to be took care of now. That's why I like what she tells us about it. So does the women. We ain't no more reason to be sure of what the curick says than to be sure of this. Dunno as I've got to choose either way, but if I 'ad, I'd choose the cheerfulest. Dart had sat staring at her. So had Polly. So had the thief. Dart rubbed his forehead. "I do not understand," he said. "'Tain't understandin'. It's believin'. Bless yer, she doesn't understand. I say, let's go and talk to her a bit. She don't mind nothin', and she'll let us in. We can leave Polly and Amir. They can make some more tea and drink it." It ended in their going out of the room together again, and stumbling once more down the stairway's crookedness. At the bottom of the first short flight, they stopped in the darkness, and Glad knocked at a door with a summons manifestly expectant of cheerful welcome. She used the formula she had used before. "It's only me, Miss Montalban," she cried out. "It's only Glad." The door opened in wide welcome, and confronting them as she held its handle stood a small old woman with an astonishing face. It was astonishing because, while it was withered and wrinkled with marks of past years which had once stamped their reckless unsavoriness upon its every line, some strange redeeming thing had happened to it, and its expression was that of a creature to whom the opening of a door could only mean the entrance, the tumbling in, as it were, of hopes realized. Its surface was swept clean of even the vaguest anticipation of anything not to be desired. Smiling as it did through the black doorway into the unrelieved shadow of the passage, it struck Antony Dart at once that it actually implied this, and that in this place, and indeed in any place, nothing could have been more astonishing. What could, indeed? "Well, well," she said, "come in, Glad, bless yer." "I brought a gent to hear you talk a bit," Glad explained informally. The small old woman raised her twinkling old face to look at him. "Ah," she said, as if summing up what was before her. "He thinks it's worse than it is, don't he? Now, come in, sir, do." This time it struck Dart that her look seemed actually to anticipate the evolving of some wonderful and desirable thing from himself, as if even his gloom carried with its treasure, yet as undisplayed. As she knew nothing of the 10 sovereigns, he wondered what, in God's name, she saw. Poverty of the little square room had an odd cheer in it. Much scrubbing had removed from it the objections manifest in Glad's room above. There was a small red fire in the grate, a strip of old but gay carpet before it. 2 chairs and a table were covered with a harlequin patchwork made of bright odds and ends of all sizes and shapes. The fog in all its murky volume could not quite obscure the brightness of the often rubbed window and its harlequin curtain drawn across upon a string. "Bless yer," said Miss Montalban, "sit down." Dart sat and thanked her. Glad dropped upon the floor and girdled her knees comfortably, while Miss Montalban took the second chair, which was close to the table, and snuffed the candle which stood near a basket of colored scraps such as, without doubt, had made the harlequin curtain. "You won't mind me going on with me bit o' work," she chirped. "Tell 'em what it is," Glad suggested. "They come from a dressmaker, as is in a small way," designating the scraps by a gesture. "I clean up for her, and she lets me have 'em. I makes 'em up into anythink I can, pin-cushions and bags and curtains and balls. Nobody'd think what they run to sometimes. Now and then I sell some of 'em. What I can't sell I give away." "Drunken Bet's Bibby plays with her ball all day," said Glad. "Ah," said Miss Montalban, drawing out a long needleful of thread. "Bet she thinks it worse than it is." "Could it be worse?" asked Dart. "Could anything be worse than everything is?" "Lots," suggested Glad. "Might have broke your back. Might have a fever. Might be in jail for killing someone. He wants to hear you talk, Miss Montalban. Tell him all about yourself." "Me?" Her expectant eyes on him. "You wouldn't want to hear it. I shouldn't want to hear it myself. Being on the alls when you're a pretty girl ain't a helpful life. And being took up and dropped down till you're dropped in the gutter and don't know how to get out of it, what's you mustn't let your mind go back to." "That's what the Liddy said," called out Glad. "Tell him about the Liddy. She doesn't even know who she was." The remark was tossed to Dart. "Never even heard her name," with unabated cheer, said Miss Montalban. She come and she went, and me too low to do anything but lie and look at her and listen. And which of us two is mad? I says to myself. But I lay thinkin' and thinkin', and it was so cheerful I couldn't get it out of my head, nor have since. What did she say? I couldn't remember the words. It was the way they took away things a body's afraid of. It was about things never havin' really been like what we thought as they was. God Almighty now, there ain't never a bit of harm in him. What? He said with a start. Ye never done the accidents and the trouble. It was us as went out of the light into the dark. If we'd kept in the light all the time, and thought about it, and talked about it, we'd never had nothin' else. 'Tain't punishment neither. 'Tain't nothin' but the dark, and ain't nothin' but the light bein' away. Keep in the light, she says. Never think of nothin' else, and then you'll begin and see things. Everybody's been afraid. There ain't no need. You believe that. Believe? Said Dart heavily. She nodded. Yes, says I to her. That's where the trouble comes in. Believin'. And she answers as cool as could be. Yes, it is, she says. We've all been thinkin'. We've been believin', and none of us has. If we'd had, what'd there be to be afraid of? If we believed a king was given us, our livin' and takin' care of us, who'd be afraid of not havin' enough to eat? Who? Groaned Dart. He sat hanging his head and staring at the floor. This was another phase of the dream. Where is he? I says. Him as breaks old women's legs and crushes babies under wheels, so as they'll be resigned. And all of a sudden she calls out quite loud, Nowhere, she says, and never was, but him as stretched forth the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth, him as is the life and love of the world, he's here. Stretch out your hand, she says, and call out, Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth, and you'll hear and see. And never you stop saying it. Let your heart beat it, and your breath breathe it, and you'll find you goin' about laughin' soft to yourself and lovin' everything as if it was your own child at breast. And no harm can come to you. Try it when you go home. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Did you? asked Dart. Glad answered for her with a tremulous yes. It was a tremulous giggle, a weirdly moved little sound. When she wakes in the morning, she says to herself, Good things is going to come today, cheerful things. When there's a knock at the door, she says, Something friendly's comin' in, and when drunken Bet's makin' a row and ragin' and tearin' and threatenin' to have her eyes out of her face, she says, Lor, Bet, you don't mean a word of it. You're a friend to every woman in the house. When she don't know which way to turn, she stands still and says, Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. And then she does whatever next comes into her mind. And she says it's allus the right answer. Sometimes, sheepishly, I've tried it myself. Perhaps it's true. I did it this morning when I sat down and pulled my sack over me out on the bridge. Polly'd been crying so loud all night I'd got a bit low in my stomach. And she stopped suddenly and turned on Dart as if light had flashed across her mind. Dunno nothing about it, she stammered, but I said it just like she does. And you come. Plainly, she had uttered whatever words she had used in the form of a sort of incantation, and here was the result in the living body of this man sitting before her. She stared hard at him, repeating her words. You come. Yes, you did. It was the answer, said Miss Montalban with entire simplicity, as she bit off her thread. That's what it was. Anthony Dart lifted his heavy head. You believe it? He said. I'm livin' on believin' it, she said confidingly. I ain't got nothin' else. And answers keep comin' and comin'. What answers? Bits o' work and things as helps. Glad there, she's one. Ah, said Glad, I ain't nothin'. I likes to hear you tell about it. She says to Dart again, a little slowly, as she watched his face with curiously questioning eyes. She says he's in the room, same as he's everywhere, in this 'ere room. Sometimes she talks out loud to him. What? Cried Dart, startled again. The strange, majestic, awful idea, the deity of the ages, to be spoken of as a mere unfeared reality? And even as the vaguely formed thought sprang in his brain, he started once more, suddenly confronted by the meaning his sense of shock implied. What had all the sermons of all the centuries been preaching but that it was reality? What had all the infidels of every age contended but that it was unreal? And the folly of a dream? He had never thought of himself as an infidel. Perhaps it would have shocked him to be called one, though he was not quite sure. But that a little superannuated dancer at music halls, battered and worn by an unlawful life, should sit and smile in absolute faith at such a superstition as this stirred something like awe in him. For she was smiling in entire acquiescence. It's what the curate says, she enlarged radiantly, though he don't believe it, poor young man. He only thinks he does. It's for high and low, he says, for you and me, as well as for them as is royal families. The Almighty, he's everywhere. Yes, says I felt him here, as near as ye are yourself, sir, I have. And I've spoken to him. What did the curate say? Dart asked, amazed. Seemed like it frightened him a bit. We mustn't be too bold, Miss Montalban, my dear, he says, for he's the kind young man as ever lived, and often says my dear to them he's comfortin'. But, you see, the Liddy had given me a Bible o' me own, and I'd set there and read it and learned verses to say to myself when I was in bed, and I'd got to feel like it was someone talking to me and making me understand. So I says, 'Tain't boldness we're warned against. It's not loving and trusting enough, and not asking and believing true. Don't you remember what it says? I, even I, am he that comforteth you. Who art thou that thou art afraid of man that shall die, and the Son of Man that shall be made as grass, and forgetteth Jehovah thy Creator, that stretched forth the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth? And I've covered thee with the shadow of me, and it says, and I will go before thee, and make the rough places smooth, and hitherto ye have asked nothing in my name. Ask therefore that ye may receive, and your joy may be made full. And he looked down on the floor, as if he was doing some hard thinking, poor young man, and he says, quite sudden and shaky, Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. And he says it as if he was in trouble, and didn't know he'd spoke out loud. How did you come upon your verses? Said Dart. How did you find them? Ah, triumphantly. They was all answers. They were the first answers I ever heard. When I first come home, and it seemed as if I was going to be swept into the dirt of the streets. One day, when I near drove wild with cold and hunger, I sat down on the floor and I dragged the Bible to me, and I says, there ain't nothing on earth or in hell as'll help me. I'm going to do what the lady said, mad or not. And I held the book, and I held my breath, too, 'cause it was like waiting for the end of the world. And after a bit, I hears myself call out in a holler whisper, Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Show me all. And I was trembling all over when I opened the book. And there it was. I will go before thee and make the rough places smooth. I will break in pieces the doors of brass, and will cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I knowed it was an answer. You knew it was an answer? What else was it? With a shining face. I'd asked for it, and there it was. And in about an hour Glad come running up here, and she'd had a bit of luck. Wasn't nothing much, Glad broke in deprecatingly. Only I'd got something to eat and a bit of fire. She made me go and have a hearty meal and set and warm myself. And she was that cheerful, full of pluck, she helped me to forget about the things that was making me into a madwoman. She was the answer, same as the book had promised. They comes in different ways, the answers does. Bless her, they don't come in claps of thunder and streaks of lightning. They just comes easy and natural. So sometimes you don't think for a minute or two that they're really answers at all. But it comes to you in a bit, and your heart stands still for joy. And ever since then I just go to me book and arst. Perhaps her smile an illuminating thing, me being the low and poor in spirit at the beginning, and settin' here all alone by myself, day in and day out, just thinking it all over, and arstin' and waitin'. Perhaps light was give me 'cause I was in such a little place and in the dark. But I ain't poor in spirit now. Lord, no, you can't be when you've only got to believe. And hitherto ye have asked nothing in my name. Ask therefore that you may receive, and your joy be made full. Am I sitting here listening to an old female reprobate's disquisition on religion? Passed through Anthony Dart's mind. Why am I listening? I am doing it because here is a creature who believes, knowing no doctrine, knowing no church. She believes, she thinks she knows, her deity is by her side. She is not afraid. To her simpleness, the awful unknown is the known, and with her. Suppose it were true, he uttered aloud, in response to a sense of inward tremor. Suppose it were true. And he was not speaking either to the woman or the girl, and his forehead was damp. God, said Glad, her chin almost on her knees, her eyes staring fearsomely. S'pose it was, and us sittin' here and not knowin' it, and no one knowin' it, nor gettin' the good of it? Sim as if, pondering hard in search of a simile, sim as if no one had ever knowed about electricity, and there wasn't no electric lights, nor no electric nothin'. Once nobody knowed, and all the time it was there, just waitin'. Her fantastic laugh ended for her with a little choking, vaguely hysterical sound. Blimey, she said, ain't it queer, us not knowin' if it's true? Anthony Dart bent forward in his chair. He looked far into the eyes of the ex-dancer, as if some unseen thing within them might answer him. Miss Montalban herself, for the moment, he did not see. What? He stammered hoarsely, his voice broken with awe. What of the hideous wrongs, the woes and the horrors? There wouldn't be none, if we was right, if we never thought nothin' but God's comin' goods here. If we, every one of us, thought it every minute of every day. She did not know she was speaking of a millennium, the end of the world. She sat by her one candle, threading her needle, and believing she was speaking of today. He laughed a hollow laugh. If we were right, he said, it would take long, long, long to make us all so. It would be slow, perhaps. Well, so it would, but good comes quick for them as begins callin' it. It's been quick for me, drawing her thread through the needle's eye triumphantly. Lor, yes, me legs is better, me luck's better, people's better. Bless yer, yes. It's true, said Glad. She gets on somehow. Things comes. She never wants no drink. Me now, she applied to Miss Montalban. If I took it up, same as you, what'd come to a gal like me? What'd you want to come? Dart saw that in her mind was an absolute lack of any premonition of obstacle. What'd you arst for in your own mind? Glad reflected profoundly. Polly, she said, She wants to go home to her mother and to the country. I ain't got no mother, and what I hear of the country seems like I'd get tired of it. Nothing but quiet and lambs and birds and things growin'. Me, I likes things goin' on. I likes people and organs and busses. I'd stay here, same as I told you," with a jerk of her hand toward Dart. "And do things in the court? If I'd had a bit of money? I don't want to live no gay life when I'm a woman. It's too hard. Us poor uns, and it's too bad. Wished I'd knowed I could get on somehow." "Good'll come," said Miss Montalban. "Just you say the same as me every mornin'. God's fillin' the world, and some of it's comin' to me. It's been sent, and I'm goin' to meet it. It's comin'. It's comin'." She bent forward and touched the girl's shoulder with her astonishing eyes alight. "Bless yer, what's in my room is yours. Lor, yes." Glad's eyes stared into hers. They became mysteriously, almost awesomely, astonishingly also. "Is it?" she breathed in a hushed voice. "Yes, Lord, yes. When yer get up in the mornin', you just stand still and arst us. 'Speak, Lord,' says you, 'speak, Lord.' 'Thy servant heareth,'" ended Glad's hushed speech. "Blimey, but I'm going to try it." Perhaps the brain of her saw it still as an incantation. Perhaps the soul of her, called up strangely out of the dark and still newborn and blind and vague, saw it vaguely and half blindly as something else. Dart was wondering which of these things were true. "We've never been expecting nothin' that's good," said Miss Montalban. "We're allus expectin' the other. Who isn't? I was allus expectin' rheumatism and hunger and cold and starvin' old age. What was you lookin' for?" to Dart. He looked down on the floor and answered heavily. "Failing brain, failing life, despair, death. None of 'em's comin' if you don't call 'em. Stand still and listen for the other. It's the other that's true." She was, without doubt, amazing. She chirped like a bird singing on a bough, rejoicing in token of the shining of the sun. "It's what you can work on, this," said Glad. "The Curricks, he's a good sort, and no harm in him, but he says trouble and hunger is der teacher to submit. Accidents and coughs as tears your lungs is sent to you to prepare you for heaven. If you loves him as sends 'em, you'll go there. Have you ever been, says I? Have you ever saw anyone that's been? Have you ever saw anyone that's ever been? No, he says. Don't, me girl, don't. Garn, I says, tell me something as'll do me some good afore I'm dead. Heaven's too far off." "The kingdom of heaven is at hand," said Miss Montalban. "Bless yer, yes, just 'ere." Anthony Dart glanced round the room. It was a strange place, but something was here. Magic, was it? Frenzy? Dreams? What? He heard from below a sudden murmur and crying out in the street. Miss Montalban heard it and stopped in her sewing, holding her needle and thread extended. Glad heard it and sprang to her feet. "Something's happened," she cried out. "Someone's hurt." She was out of the room in a breath's space. She stood outside listening a few seconds and darted back to the open door, speaking through it. They could hear below commotion, exclamations, the wail of a child. "Something's happened to Bet," she cried out again. "I can hear the child." She was gone and flying down the staircase. Anthony Dart and Miss Montalban rose together. The tumult was increasing. People were running about in the court, and it was plain a crowd was forming by the magic which calls up crowds as from nowhere about the door. The child's screams rose shrill above the noise. It was no small thing which had occurred. "I must go," said Miss Montalban, limping away from her table. "Perhaps I can help. Perhaps you can help, too," as he followed her. They were met by Glad at the threshold. She had shot back to them, panting. "She was blind drunk," she said, And she went out to get more. She tried to cross the street and fell under a car. She'll be dead in 5 minutes. I'm going for the bibby." Dart saw Miss Montalban step back into her room. He turned involuntarily to look at her. She stood still a second, so still that it seemed as if she was not drawing mortal breath. Her astonishing, expectant eyes closed themselves, and yet in closing spoke expectancy still. "Speak, Lord," she said softly, but as if she spoke to something whose nearness to her was such that her hand might have touched it. "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." Anthony Dart almost felt his hair raise. He quaked as she came nearer, her poor clothes brushing against him. He drew back to let her pass first, and followed her leading. The court was filled with men, women, and children, who surged about the doorway, talking, crying, and protesting against each other's crowding. Dart caught a glimpse of a policeman fighting his way through with the doctor. A disheveled woman with a child at her dirty bare breast had got in and was talking loudly. "Just outside the court it was," she proclaimed, "and I saw it. If she'd been herself, it couldn't have happened. No time for hospitals, says I. She's not 20 breaths to draw her. Let her die in her own bed, poor thing." And both she and her baby, breaking into wails at one and the same time, other women, some hysteric, some maudlin with gin, joined them in a terrified outburst. "Get out, you women," commanded the doctor, who had forced his way across the threshold. "Send them away, officer," to the policeman. There were others to turn out of the room itself, which was crowded with morbid or terrified creatures, all making for confusion. Glad had seized the child and was forcing her way out into such air as there was outside. The bed, a strange and loathly thing, stood by the empty, rusty fireplace. Drunken Bet lay on it, a bundle of clothing, over which the doctor bent for but a few minutes before he turned away. Anthony Dart, standing near the door, heard Miss Montalban speak to him in a whisper. "May I go to her?" And the doctor nodded. She limped lightly forward, and her small face was white, but expectant still. What could she expect now? Oh, Lord, what? And an extraordinary thing happened. An abnormal silence fell. The owners of such faces as on stretched necks caught sight of her seemed in a flash to communicate with others in the crowd. "Jinny Montalban," someone whispered. Jinny Montalban was passed along, leaving an odd stirring in its wake. Those whom the pressure outside had crushed against the wall near the window in a passionate hurry breathed on and rubbed the panes that they might lay their faces to them. One tore out the rags stuffed in a broken place and listened breathlessly. Jinny Montalban was kneeling down and laying her small old hand on the muddied forehead. She held it there a second or so, then spoke in a voice whose low clearness brought back at once to Dart the voice in which she had spoken to the something upstairs. "Bet," she said, "Bet," and then more soft still, and yet more clear. "Bet, my dear." It seemed incredible, but it was a fact. Slowly the lids of the woman's eyes lifted, and the pupils fixed themselves on Jinny Montalban, who leaned still closer and spoke again. "'Tain't true," she said. "Not this. 'Tain't true. There is no death." Slow and soft, but passionately distinct. "There is no death. There is no death." The muscles of the woman's face twisted it into a rueful smile. The 3 words she dragged out were so faint that perhaps none but Dart's strained ear heard them. "What price me?" The soul of her was loosening fast and straining away, but Jinny Montalban followed it. "There is no death," and her low voice had the tone of a slender silver trumpet. "In a minute you'll know it. In a minute Lord, lifting her expectant face, show her the way. Mysteriously, the clouds were clearing from the sodden face. Mysteriously, Miss Montalban watched them as they were swept away. A minute, 2 minutes, and they were gone. Then she rose noiselessly and stood looking down, speaking quite simply as if to herself. "Ah," she breathed. "She does know now, for sure and certain." Then Antony Dart, turning slightly, realized that a man who had entered the house had been standing near him, breathing with light quickness since the moment Miss Montalban had knelt, was plainly the person Glad had called the Kirk, and that he had bowed his head and covered his eyes with a hand which trembled. Chapter 4. He was a young man with an eager soul, and his work in Apple Blossom Court and places like it had torn him many ways. Religious conventions, established through centuries of custom, had not prepared him for life among the submerged. He had struggled and been appalled. He had wrestled in prayer and felt himself unanswered, and in repentance of the feeling had scourged himself with thorns. Miss Montalban, returning from the hospital, had filled him at first with horror and protest. "But who knows," he said to Dart, as they stood and talked together afterward. "Faith is a little child. That is literally hers. And I was shocked by it and tried to destroy it, until I suddenly saw what I was doing. I was, in my cloddish egotism, trying to show her that she was irreverent because she could believe what in my soul I do not, though I dare not admit so much even to myself. She took from some strange passing visitor to her tortured bedside what was to her a revelation. She heard it first as a child hears a story of magic. When she came out of the hospital, she told it as if it was one. He bit his lips and moistened them, argued with her and reproached her. Christ the merciful, forgive me. She sat in her squalid little room with her magic, sometimes in the dark, sometimes without fire, and she clung to it and loved it and asked it to help her, as a child asks its father for bread. When she was answered, and God forgive me again for doubting that the simple good that came to her was an answer, when any small help came to her, she was a radiant thing, and without a shadow of a doubt in her eyes told me of it as proof that she had been heard. When things went wrong for a day, and the fire was out again and the room dark, she said, "I 'aven't kept near enough. I 'aven't trusted true. It will be gave me soon." And when once at such time I said to her, "We must learn to say, 'Thy will be done,' she smiled up at me like a happy baby and answered, 'Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.' Lord, there's no cold there, nor no hunger, nor no crying nor pain. That's the way the will is done in heaven. That's what I arst for all day long, for it to be done on earth as it is in heaven." What could I say? Could I tell her that the will of the deity on the earth he created was only the will to do evil, to give pain, to crush the creatures made in his own image? What else do we mean when we say, under all horror and agony that befalls, "It is God's will be done"? Base unbeliever though I am, I could not speak the words. Oh, she has something we have not. Her poor little misspent life has changed itself into a shining thing, though it shines and glows only in this hideous place. She herself does not know of its shining, but drunken Bet would stagger up to her room and ask to be told what she called her pantomime stories. I have seen her sitting there listening, with a strange quiet on her and dull yearning in her sodden eyes. So would other and worse women go to her, and I, who had struggled with them, could see that she had reached some remote longing in their beings which I had never touched. In time the seed would have stirred to life. It is beginning to stir even now. During the months since she came back to the court, though they have laughed at her, both men and women have begun to see her as a creature weirdly set apart. Most of them feel something like awe of her. They half believe her prayers to be bewitchments, but they want them on their side. They have never wanted mine. That I have known. She believes that her deity is in Apple Blossom Court, and in the dire holes its people live in, on the broken stairway, in every nook and awful cranny of it, great glory we will not see, only waiting to be called into answer. Do I believe it? Do you? Do any of those anointed of us who preach each day so glibly, God is everywhere? Who is the one who believes? If there were such a man, he would go about as Moses did when he wist not his face shone. They had gone out together and were standing in the fog in the court. The curate removed his hat and passed his handkerchief over his damp forehead. His breath coming and going, almost sobbingly, his eyes staring straight before him into the yellowness of the haze. "Who?" he said after a moment of singular silence. "Who are you?" Antony Dart hesitated a few seconds, and at the end of his pause he put his hand into his overcoat pocket. "If you will come upstairs with me to the room where the girl Glad lives, I will tell you," he said. "But before we go, I want to hand something over to you." The curate turned an amazed gaze upon him. "What is it?" he asked. Dart withdrew his hand from his pocket, and the pistol was in it. "I came out this morning to buy this," he said. "I intended—" "Never mind what I intended. A wrong turn taken in the fog brought me here. Take this thing from me and keep it." The curate took the pistol and put it into his own pocket without comment. In the course of his labors, he had seen desperate men and desperate things many times. He had even been, at moments, a desperate man, thinking desperate things himself, though no human being had ever suspected the fact. This man had faced some tragedy, he could see. Had he been on the verge of a crime? Had he looked murder in the eyes? What had made him pause? Was it possible that the dream of Ginny Montalban being in the air had reached his brain, his being? He looked almost appealingly at him, but he only said aloud, "Let us go upstairs, then." So they went. As they passed the door of the room where the dead woman lay, Dart went in and spoke to Miss Montalban, who was still there. "If there are things wanted here," he said, "this will buy them," and he put some money into her hand. She did not seem surprised at the incongruity of his shabbiness producing money. "Well, now," she said, "I was wondering and asking. I'd like her clean and nice, and there's milk wanted bad for the baby." In the room they mounted to, Glad was trying to feed the child with bread softened in tea. Polly sat near her, looking on with restless, eager eyes. She had never seen anything of her own baby but its limp newborn and dead body being carried away out of sight. She had not even dared to ask what was done with such poor little carrion. The tyranny of the law of life made her want to paw and touch this lately born thing, as her agony had given her no fruit of her own body to touch and paw and nuzzle and caress as mother creatures will, whether they be women or tigresses or doves or female cats. "Let me hold her, Glad," she half whimpered. "When she's fed, let me get her to sleep." "All right," Glad answered. "We could look after her between us well enough." The thief was still sitting on the hearth, but being full fed and comfortable for the first time in many a day, he had rested his head against the wall and fallen into profound sleep. "What's up?" said Glad when the two men came in. "Is anything happening?" "I have come up here to tell you something," Dart answered. "Let us sit down again around the fire. It will take a little time." Glad, with eager eyes on him, handed the child to Polly and sat down without a moment's hesitance, avid of what was to come. She nudged the thief with friendly elbow, and he started up awake. "He's got something to tell us," she explained. "The Curricks come up to hear it, too. Sit here, Polly," with an elbow jerk toward the bundle of sacks. "It's got its stomach full, and it'll go to sleep fast enough." So they sat again in the weird circle. Neither the strangeness of the group nor the squalor of the hearth were of a nature to be new things to the curate. His eyes fixed themselves on Dart's face, as did the eyes of the thief, the beggar, and the young thing of the street. No one glanced away from him. His telling of his story was almost monotonous in its semi-reflective quietness of tone. The strangeness to himself, though it was a strangeness he accepted absolutely without protest, lay in his telling it at all, and in a sense of his knowledge that each of these creatures would understand and mysteriously know what depths he had touched this day. "Just before I left my lodgings this morning," he said, "I found myself standing in the middle of my room and speaking to something aloud. I did not know I was going to speak. I did not know what I was speaking to. I heard my own voice cry out in agony, 'Lord, Lord, what shall I do to be saved?'" The curate made a sudden movement in his place, and his sallow young face flushed, but he said nothing. Glad's small and sharp countenance became curious. "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," she quoted tentatively. "No," answered Dart, "it was not like that. I had never thought of such things. I believed nothing. I was going out to buy a pistol, and when I returned, intended to blow my brains out." "Why?" asked Glad with passionately intent eyes. "Why?" "Because I was worn out and done for, and all the world seemed worn out and done for. And among other things, I believed I was beginning slowly to go mad." From the thief there burst forth a low groan, and he turned his face to the wall. "I've been there," he said. "I'm near there now." Dart took up speech again. There was no answer, none. As I stood waiting, God knows for what, the dead stillness of the room was like the dead stillness of the grave. And I went out saying to my soul, "This is what happens to the fool who cries aloud in his pain." "I've cried aloud," said the thief, "and sometimes it seemed as if an answer was coming, but I always knew it never would," in a tortured voice. "'Tain't fair to arst that way," Glad put in with shrewd logic. "Miss Montalban, she allers knows it will come, and it does." "Something, not myself, turned my feet toward this place," said Dart. "I was thrust from one thing to another. I was forced to see and hear things close at hand. It had been as if I was under a spell. The woman in the room below, the woman lying dead." He stopped a second and then went on. "There's too much that is crying out aloud. A man such as I am, it has forced itself upon me, cannot leave such things and give himself to the dust. I cannot explain clearly because I am not thinking as I am accustomed to think. A change has come upon me. I shall not use the pistol as I meant to use it." Glad made a friendly clutch at the sleeve of his shabby coat. "Right-o," she cried. "That's it. You buck up, sime as I told you. You ain't stony broke, and there's allers tomorrow." Antony Dart's expression was weirdly retrospective. "I did not think so this morning," he answered. "But there is," said the girl. "Ain't there now, Currick? There's a lot o' work in you yet. You could do all sorts of things if you ain't too proud. I'll help yer. So'll the Currick. You ain't found out yet what a little folks can live on till luck turns. Me, I'm going to try Miss Montalban's way. Let's both try. Let's believe things is comin'. Let's get her to talk to us some more." The curate was thinking the thing over deeply. "You see," Glad enlarged cheerfully, "you look almost like a gentleman. Perhaps you can write a good hand and spell all right, can yer?" "Yes." "I think, perhaps," the curate began reflectively, "particularly if you can write well, I might be able to get you some work." "I do not want work," Dart answered slowly, At least I do not want the kind you would be likely to offer me." The curate felt a shock, as if cold water had been dashed over him. Somehow it had not once occurred to him that the man could be one of the educated, degenerate, vicious, for whom no power to help lay in any hands. Yet he was not the common vagrant, and he was plainly on the point of producing an excuse for refusing work. The other man, seeing his start and his amazed, troubled flush, put out a hand and touched his arm apologetically. "I beg your pardon," he said. "One of the things I was going to tell you, I had not finished, was that I am what is called a gentleman. I am also what the world knows as a rich man. I am Sir Oliver Holt." Each member of the party gazed at him aghast. It was an enormous name to claim. Even the two female creatures knew what it stood for. It was the name which represented the greatest wealth and power in the world of finance and schemes of business. It stood for financial influence which could change the face of national fortunes and bring about crises. It was known throughout the world. Yesterday, the newspaper rumor that its owner had mysteriously left England had caused men on the exchange to discuss possibilities together with lowered voices. Glad stared at the curate. For the first time she looked disturbed and alarmed. "Blimey," she ejaculated. "He's gone off his nut, poor chap. He's gone off it." "No," the man answered. "You shall come to me." He hesitated a second, while a shade passed over his eyes. "Tomorrow, and you shall see." He rose quietly to his feet, and the curate rose also. Abnormal as the climax was, it was to be seen that there was no mistake about the revelation. The man was a creature of authority and used to carrying conviction by his unsupported word. That made itself by some clear, unspoken method plain. "You are Sir Oliver Holt, and a few hours ago you were on the point of ending it all in an obscure lodging. Afterward the earth would have been shoveled on to a workhouse coffin. It was an awful thing." He shook off a passionate shudder. "There was no wealth on earth that could give me a moment's ease, sleep, hope, life. The whole world was full of things I loathed the sight of and thought of. The doctor said my condition was physical. Perhaps it was. Perhaps today has strangely given a healthful jolt to my nerves. Perhaps I have been dragged away from the agony of morbidity and plunged into new, intense emotions which have saved me from the last thing and the worst. Saved me." He suddenly stopped, and his face flushed, and then quite slowly turned pale. "Saved me." He repeated the words as the curate saw the awed blood creepingly recede. "Who knows? Who knows? How many explanations one is ready to give before one thinks of what we say we believe. Perhaps it was the answer." The curate bowed his head reverently. "Perhaps it was." The girl Glad sat clinging to her knees, her eyes wide and awed, and with a sudden gush of hysteric tears rushing down her cheeks. "That's the why! That's the why!" she gulped out. "No one won't never believe. They won't never. That's what she sees, Miss Montalban. You don't. 'E don't," with a jerk toward the curate. "I ain't nothing but me, but blimey if I don't. Blimey!" Sir Oliver Holt grew paler still. He felt as he had done when Jinny Montalban's poor dress swept against him. His voice shook when he spoke. "So do I," he said with a sudden deep catch of breath. It was the answer. In a few moments more he went to the girl Polly and laid a hand on her shoulder. "I shall take you home to your mother," he said. "I shall take you myself and care for you both. She shall know nothing you are afraid of her hearing. I shall ask her to bring up the child. You will help her." Then he touched the thief, who got up, white and shaking, with eyes moist with excitement. "You shall never see another man claim your thought, because you have not time or money to work it out. You will go with me. There are tomorrows enough for you." Glad still sat clinging to her knees with tears running, but the ugliness of her sharp, small face was a thing an angel might have paused to see. "You don't want to go away from here," Sir Oliver said to her, and she shook her head. "No, not me. I told you what I wanted. Let me do it." "You shall," he answered, "and I will help you." The things which developed in Apple Blossom Court later, the things which came to each of those who had sat in the weird circle round the fire, the revelations of new existence which came to herself, aroused no amazement in Jinny Montalban's mind. She had asked and believed all things, and all this was but another of the answers. End of The Dawn of a To-morrow by Frances Hodgson Burnett.